July 26, 1959, 47,000 feet above North Carolina. The temperature outside is minus 50 degrees Celsius, cold enough that exposed flesh freezes instantly, cold enough that the thin air at this altitude contains barely enough oxygen to sustain consciousness, cold enough that Lieutenant Colonel William Rankin can see ice crystals forming on the inside of his F-8 Crusader's canopy. The jet fighter's engine has just exploded. Not failed, exploded. A catastrophic turbine failure that sent metal fragments tearing through the fuselage, severing hydraulic lines, electrical systems, and control cables. The aircraft is dying around him, systems failing in cascading sequence, the controls in his hands becoming progressively less responsive until they are merely suggestions to an aircraft that no longer obeys. Rankin checks his instruments out of habit, though he already knows what they will tell him. Hydraulic pressure, 0. Electrical power, failing. Engine temperature, off the scale before the gauge died. Altitude, 47,000 feet and descending as the dead aircraft, now nothing more than a 20,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic properties of a brick, begins its inevitable fall toward Earth. He has perhaps 30 seconds to make a decision that will determine whether he lives or dies. Every procedure, every training evolution, every instructor at test pilot school has drilled the same protocol into his mind. Engine failure at altitude means immediate ejection. Do not attempt to restart. Do not attempt to glide to a suitable landing site. The F-8 Crusader without engine power is uncontrollable. Eject immediately, deploy your parachute, and descend to a safe altitude where oxygen is available and temperature is survivable. But Rankin is looking at something that makes immediate ejection not just dangerous, but potentially fatal. Directly below his aircraft, extending from approximately 45,000 feet down to 10,000 feet, is a cumulonimbus cloud, a thunderstorm of such size and violence that its top has punched through the normal cloud ceiling into the stratosphere. He can see lightning flickering inside the cloud mass, can see the roiling turbulence that marks updrafts and downdrafts with velocities that exceed 100 miles per hour. He can see the darkness inside the cloud that speaks of hail, freezing rain, and wind shear that tears aircraft apart. The mathematics are simple and brutal. If he ejects now at 47,000 feet, he will fall through 37,000 feet of the most violent atmospheric conditions on Earth. The ejection seat will separate at approximately 15,000 feet, and his parachute will automatically deploy at 10,000 feet. Standard automatic deployment settings designed to ensure pilots don't remain at high altitude without oxygen longer than necessary. This means he will be in free fall, unconscious or semi-conscious from hypoxia, for approximately 32,000 feet of descent, followed by 10,000 feet under canopy, all of it inside a thunderstorm that will throw him around like a leaf in a hurricane. The alternative is to stay with the aircraft, riding it down through the cloud layer to clear air below, then ejecting at an altitude where the parachute descent will be quick and controlled. But the aircraft is falling at an accelerating rate and the controls are nearly useless. If he waits too long, he will be too low to safely eject. If the aircraft enters an uncontrolled spin or structural failure occurs, he will die before he can escape. Rankin makes his calculation. The thunderstorm below him is approximately 35,000 feet thick. At normal free-fall velocity of approximately 120 miles per hour, he should pass through it in roughly 4 to 5 minutes. 4 to 5 minutes of hell, but survivable. Then parachute descent below the storm in clear air, landing in the North Carolina countryside where rescue will be straightforward. What Rankin does not know, what no pilot in 1959 knows because no one has ever survived to document it, is that the internal dynamics of a cumulonimbus thunderstorm create conditions that defy normal physics of free fall. The updrafts inside the storm are powerful enough to lift a falling human body, to carry it upward thousands of feet against gravity, to trap it in a cycle of rising and falling that can last not 4 minutes but 40 minutes. The hail inside the storm is large enough to cause severe trauma. The lightning inside the storm turns the entire cloud mass into an electrical field, where every metal object becomes a potential strike point. The temperature inside the storm varies from minus 50 degrees Celsius to above freezing in vertical distances of mere hundreds of feet, creating thermal shock that can kill as surely as impact. Rankin is about to become the first and only person in documented history to survive a prolonged fall through the interior of a violent thunderstorm. Over the next 40 minutes, he will experience conditions that should kill him a dozen different ways. He will be carried upward by updrafts so powerful they overcome his falling velocity, lifting him thousands of feet higher than his ejection altitude. He will be struck by hail that fractures ribs and causes internal bleeding. He will be subjected to lightning strikes close enough that the electrical discharge causes temporary blindness and burns. He will lose consciousness repeatedly from hypoxia and cold, only to be shocked back to awareness by the violence of the storm. And he will survive. Not through any technique or trick that can be taught in survival school, but through a combination of the automatic systems in his pressure suit and parachute that continue functioning even when he is unconscious, the random chance that determines whether an updraft carries him to an altitude where he suffocates or to an altitude where he can breathe, and the sheer physiological resilience of a human body that refuses to die even when subjected to conditions beyond its design limits. How does one pilot survive 40 minutes inside a thunderstorm that should have killed him in the first 60 seconds? What were the factors, equipment, physiology, and pure chance that allowed him to endure what meteorologists said was impossible to survive? And why did this impossible survival, change how the military understood high-altitude ejection and led to fundamental redesigns of ejection systems and pressure suits? This is the story of the man who fell through hell and lived to document it. The 40-minute descent that should have been 4 minutes, and the survival that proved sometimes living through the impossible requires nothing more than refusing to die while the universe decides whether to kill you. While William Rankin was growing up in South Carolina during the 1930s, learning to fly crop dusters as a teenager and dreaming of becoming a military pilot, the world was developing the high-altitude jet aircraft that would eventually bring him to 47,000 feet above a thunderstorm with a dead engine. After World War II, military aviation entered the jet age. Piston engines were replaced by turbojets and turbofans that could push aircraft to speeds and altitudes that had been impossible with propeller-driven planes. By the 1950s, military jets routinely operated above 40,000 feet, in the stratosphere where the air is too thin to breathe and temperatures are lethal. This created new challenges for pilot survival. Ejection seats allowed pilots to escape from disabled aircraft, but ejection at extreme altitude meant descending through conditions that were themselves potentially fatal. The solution was pressure suits, essentially spacesuits that maintained pressure and temperature for the pilot, and automatic parachute deployment systems that would open the parachute at a safe altitude without requiring the pilot to be conscious. The Vought F-8 Crusader that Rankin was flying in July 1959 was a carrier-based fighter, capable of speeds exceeding Mach 1.8 and operational altitudes above 50,000 feet. It was powered by a Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet producing 18,000 pounds of thrust. The aircraft was known for its performance but also for its maintenance challenges. The J57 engine was powerful but prone to compressor failures and turbine problems. William Rankin had enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1940 and earned his wings in 1942. He flew combat missions in World War II and Korea, accumulating thousands of flight hours in everything from propeller fighters to early jets. By 1959, he was a test pilot and instructor, one of the most experienced aviators in the Marine Corps. He understood aircraft systems, understood emergency procedures, and understood that sometimes survival depends on making decisions that seem wrong, but that are actually the least bad option among several terrible choices. On July 26, 1959, Rankin was conducting a routine flight from Naval Air Station South Weymouth, Massachusetts, to Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort, South Carolina. The flight was planned as a high-altitude transit at 47,000 feet, taking advantage of the thin air and favorable winds to maximize fuel efficiency. Weather forecasts indicated thunderstorm activity along the route, but the storms were expected to be below 30,000 feet, well below his planned altitude. What the weather forecast had not captured was that one particular storm system had developed with extraordinary violence, its convective energy so powerful that it had punched upward into the stratosphere, creating a cumulonimbus cloud that reached to 45,000 feet or higher. This is rare, but not impossible. The most violent thunderstorms can reach altitudes above 50,000 feet, though their tops are usually composed of ice crystals rather than the liquid water and hail found at lower altitudes. Rankin's first indication that something was wrong came at 18:15 hours when the engine fire warning light illuminated. Engine fires in jets are serious but manageable if caught early. The standard procedure is to shut down the engine. activate fire suppression systems, and begin an emergency descent to the nearest suitable airfield. But before Rankin could begin the emergency procedure, the engine exploded. The sound was overwhelming even through his helmet and the pressurization of the cockpit. The aircraft shuddered violently. Multiple warning lights illuminated simultaneously. The control stick went slack in his hands as hydraulic pressure dropped to zero. The aircraft began to yaw and roll, no longer responding to control inputs. Rankin's training took over. He reached for the ejection handles, twin handles between his legs that, when pulled, would initiate the ejection sequence. Explosive bolts would blow the canopy. The ejection seat would fire, using a rocket motor to propel him and the seat upward and away from the aircraft. Then, at a preset altitude, the seat would separate and his parachute would deploy automatically. But before he pulled the handles, he looked down, and he saw the Thunderstorm. The standard pressure suit worn by military pilots in 1959 was the MC-3 partial pressure suit, designed to maintain pilot survival at altitudes up to 80,000 feet for limited periods. The suit worked by applying mechanical pressure to the body through a system of capstan tubes, fabric tubes that inflated when the suit detected low external pressure, squeezing the pilot's body to prevent embolism, the formation of gas bubbles in body fluids at very low pressures. The suit was connected to an oxygen system that supplied 100% oxygen under positive pressure, forcing oxygen into the lungs even when the external air pressure was too low for normal breathing. The suit also provided some thermal protection through its multiple layers, though it was not designed for prolonged exposure to extreme cold. The parachute system was a B-4 backpack parachute with automatic opening device. The main canopy was 28 feet in diameter when deployed, providing a descent rate of approximately 18 feet per second. Uncomfortable, but survivable. The automatic opening device was a barometric trigger set to deploy the parachute at 10,000 feet. This altitude was chosen as a compromise, low enough that oxygen deprivation would not be severe, high enough that the pilot would have time to prepare for landing. The ejection seat was a Douglas Mk5, capable of safe ejection at speeds up to 600 knots and at altitudes from sea level to above 50,000 feet. The seat used a 90mm rocket motor to propel the pilot away from the aircraft, achieving separation velocity of approximately 40 feet per second. After ejection, the seat would stabilize in a feet-down attitude and remain attached to the pilot until the automatic separation altitude of approximately 15,000 feet. This combination of equipment was designed to save pilots from disabled aircraft at high altitude. What it was not designed for, what no one had considered necessary, was protection for a pilot descending through the interior of a violent thunderstorm. Rankin pulled the ejection handles at 18-16 hours, at an altitude of approximately 47,000 feet, directly above the thunderstorm. The ejection sequence happened in less than 2 seconds. The canopy blew away. The rocket motor fired. Rankin and his seat were hurled upward and away from the dying F-8 Crusader at acceleration forces exceeding 15 Gs, 15 times the force of gravity, enough to cause temporary blackout. He felt the crushing pressure on his chest, the sensation of being hit by a train, the instant of disorientation as up and down lost meaning. Then he was clear of the aircraft, tumbling through space at 47,000 feet, still strapped to the ejection seat, beginning his fall toward Earth. The first sensation was cold. Despite the pressure suit, despite the multiple layers of fabric and the thermal protection, the cold at 47,000 feet penetrated instantly, minus 50 degrees Celsius. His face, the only exposed part of his body not covered by the suit, felt like it was being stabbed with thousands of needles. His breath, forced out by the ejection, crystallized instantly into ice particles. The second sensation was the struggle to breathe. At 47,000 feet, atmospheric pressure is approximately 1.5 psi, 1/10 of sea level pressure. Without the pressure suit maintaining pressure on his body and without the oxygen system forcing oxygen into his lungs, he would lose consciousness in 15 seconds and die in 2 minutes. But the suit was functioning, inflating its capstan tubes, squeezing his body, and the oxygen system was flowing, forcing oxygen into his lungs with each breath. The third sensation was the silence. At 47,000 feet, the air is so thin that sound doesn't travel normally. He could not hear the wind. He could not hear his own breathing clearly. He was falling through near vacuum, in near silence, in cold that was trying to freeze him solid. He was in free fall, still attached to the ejection seat, falling at a velocity that was increasing with each second. At 47,000 feet, terminal velocity is much higher than at sea level because air resistance is minimal. He was probably falling at close to 200 miles per hour, approaching the speed where aerodynamic forces would begin to tumble the seat and potentially injure him. At approximately 15,000 feet, about 90 seconds into the fall, the automatic seat separation mechanism fired. Small explosive charges severed the connections between Rankin and the seat. The seat fell away. Rankin was now in free fall by himself, spread-eagled in the classic stable free fall position, falling at approximately 120 miles per hour through air that was becoming progressively thicker and warmer as altitude decreased. At approximately 10,000 feet, roughly 2 minutes and 30 seconds into the fall, the automatic parachute deployment system activated. A small drogue chute deployed first, stabilizing his body and slowing his descent slightly. Then the main parachute deployed with a violent opening shock that jerked him upright and slowed his descent from 120 miles per hour to approximately 18 feet per second, 12 miles per hour. All of this happened exactly as designed. The equipment functioned perfectly. Rankin should now have been descending peacefully under his parachute canopy, falling through approximately 10,000 feet of clear air below the cloud layer, preparing for a routine parachute landing. Instead, he was inside the thunderstorm, and the nightmare was just beginning. A cumulonimbus thunderstorm is one of the most violent atmospheric phenomena on Earth. The storm that Rankin had ejected into was a supercell, the most powerful type of thunderstorm, characterized by rotating updrafts and extreme vertical development. The internal structure of the storm created conditions that are difficult to imagine if you haven't experienced them. Updrafts in a severe thunderstorm can exceed 100 miles per hour, faster than Rankin's terminal freefall velocity, faster than his descent rate under parachute. When Rankin's parachute deployed at 10,000 feet and he began descending at 12 miles per hour, he entered a region of the storm where the updraft velocity was approximately 80 miles per hour. The net result, instead of descending, he was lifted upward at approximately 68 miles per hour. He felt the parachute suddenly pull upward instead of providing the steady downward descent he expected. He looked up and saw the canopy inflating not from below as it should, but from above, meaning air was rushing upward past him with enough force to overcome gravity and his weight combined. He was being carried upward, higher than his ejection altitude, back into the region where oxygen was insufficient and cold was deadly. His pressure suit saved him. As he rose back above 15,000 feet, the suit detected the decreasing pressure and inflated its bladders, maintaining pressure on his body. His oxygen system continued flowing, forcing oxygen into his lungs despite the thin air. But the cold was penetrating. His extremities, hands and feet, the parts farthest from his core body heat, were going numb. Then the updraft weakened or shifted, and he began to fall again. The transition was violent. One moment he was rising at 68 miles per hour. The next moment he was falling at 12 miles per hour. The acceleration forces were disorienting, nauseating. He fell perhaps 5,000 feet and entered another updraft. Again he was carried upward, the parachute pulling him skyward instead of lowering him to earth. This cycle repeated. Updraft, rise, transition, fall, updraft, rise. Each cycle carried him to a different part of the storm, exposed him to different conditions, subjected his body to forces that accumulated trauma. The hail began at some point. Rankin lost track of time and sequence in the chaos. Hailstones ranging from marble-sized to golf ball-sized frozen solid, falling at terminal velocity of 50 to 100 miles per hour depending on size. When hail falling at 80 miles per hour meets a human body rising at 60 miles per hour in an updraft, the collision velocity is 140 miles per hour. Golf ball-sized hail hitting at that velocity hits with the force of a hammer blow. Rankin felt the impacts through his pressure suit and flight suit, his chest, his back, his head protected by his helmet but still vulnerable to the transmitted force. One particularly large hailstone struck his rib cage with enough force to fracture 2 ribs. He felt the snap, felt the sudden sharp pain even through the adrenaline and the cold. The lightning was constant. Inside a thunderstorm, the electrical field is so intense that everything becomes part of the circuit. Rankin could see lightning striking around him, could see the purple-white glow of St. Elmo's fire dancing along his parachute lines and risers. At one point, A lightning bolt struck close enough that the electrical discharge caused his vision to white out temporarily, caused every muscle in his body to contract involuntarily, caused burns on his hands and neck where metal objects, his wristwatch, the metal fasteners on his suit, conducted the current. The rain inside the storm was not falling. It was being blown horizontally or even upward by the winds, creating a condition where Rankin was essentially submerged in water while flying through the air. He was drowning in mid-air, coughing water out of his lungs, struggling to breathe through the oxygen mask that was designed to deliver oxygen, but not to prevent water from entering his nose and mouth. The temperature variations were extreme. In updrafts that carried him above 20,000 feet, the temperature was below -30 degrees Celsius. In downdrafts that plunged him below 5,000 feet, the temperature was above 0 degrees Celsius. These rapid temperature changes, sometimes 30 degrees in a matter of seconds, caused thermal shock that is physiologically disorienting and dangerous. At some point, Rankin lost consciousness. The combination of hypoxia from periods at extreme altitude, hypothermia from prolonged cold exposure, trauma from hail impacts and lightning, and the sheer physical exhaustion of fighting the storm overwhelmed his body. He blacked out, hanging limp in his parachute harness, no longer aware of what was happening to him. The automatic systems in his pressure suit and oxygen system kept him alive while he was unconscious. The suit maintained pressure, the oxygen flowed, and the parachute continued to function, rising and falling with the storm currents, carrying his unconscious body through the chaos. How long he was unconscious, he never knew. Minutes, certainly, possibly much longer. When he regained consciousness, he had no idea where he was in the storm or how long he had been falling. His watch had been destroyed by lightning. His sense of time was completely disrupted, but he became aware that the violence was decreasing. The updrafts were weaker. The hail had stopped. The lightning was less frequent. He was descending more steadily, without the wild oscillations of rising and falling. He looked down and saw trees, ground. He was below the cloud base, in rain but not in the thunderstorm interior. He was actually going to reach the ground. The landing was uncontrolled and hard. Rankin was too injured and disoriented to properly prepare for parachute landing fall technique. He hit in a wooded area, struck tree branches that slowed him somewhat, and then impacted the ground with force enough to cause additional injuries. He lay on the ground, unable to move, barely conscious, trying to process that he was alive. His pressure suit had automatically depressurized when it detected sea-level pressure. He could breathe normal air. The cold was gone, replaced by the humid warmth of a North Carolina summer evening. The violence of the storm was above him now, receding, the thunder distant. He had survived. A local farmer found him approximately 45 minutes later, drawn by the sight of the parachute caught in trees. The farmer called emergency services. Rankin was transported to a hospital where doctors documented his injuries. 2 fractured ribs, severe bruising across his entire torso, first and second degree burns from lightning strikes, frostbite on his hands and feet, mild hypothermia, and internal bleeding from blunt trauma. The doctor said he should be dead. The injuries he sustained should have been fatal individually, let alone in combination. The conditions he described, 40 minutes inside a thunderstorm, repeatedly carried upward by updrafts to altitudes where oxygen was insufficient, should have resulted in death from hypoxia, hypothermia, or trauma. But Rankin was alive, and he was lucid enough to provide a detailed account of what he had experienced. What was the real secret to Rankin's survival? How did he endure conditions that should have been lethal? The answer lies in understanding that survival of extreme conditions often depends on marginal factors, small advantages that accumulate to make the difference between life and death. Post-event analysis by military medical personnel and meteorologists identified several factors that contributed to Rankin's survival. The pressure suit. Without the MC-3 partial pressure suit maintaining pressure on his body and forcing oxygen into his lungs during periods at extreme altitude, Rankin would have died from hypoxia within minutes. The suit functioned throughout the ordeal despite being subjected to conditions far beyond its design specifications. The parachute. The B-4 parachute remained intact despite being subjected to extreme forces, lightning strikes, and hail impacts. The canopy could have easily been torn or collapsed by the updrafts and winds, which would have resulted in uncontrolled fall and certain death. The parachute's robustness was partially luck. It happened not to take a direct lightning strike to the canopy fabric. and partially the inherent strength of military parachute design. The storm dynamics. While the storm created the dangerous conditions that nearly killed Rankin, it also prevented him from falling straight through at terminal velocity. The updrafts that repeatedly lifted him actually extended his time in the storm, but they also slowed his overall descent rate. He was in the storm for 40 minutes instead of 4 minutes, but his average descent rate was much slower than free fall, which reduced the cumulative trauma from deceleration forces. Physiological resilience. Rankin was an experienced pilot in excellent physical condition, age 39, with no underlying health conditions. His body was able to withstand cold, hypoxia, and trauma that would have killed someone less fit. Additionally, his experience with high-altitude flight meant his body was somewhat adapted to low oxygen conditions. The autopilot effect. When Rankin lost consciousness, the automatic systems in his suit and parachute continued functioning without requiring conscious action from him. This meant that periods of unconsciousness, which would normally be fatal, were actually protective, allowing his body to shut down non-essential functions and conserve resources. Thermal protection. Although Rankin experienced severe cold, the temperature variations inside the storm actually prevented him from freezing to death. If he had remained at constant minus 50 degrees Celsius for 40 minutes, he would likely have died from hypothermia. But the storm repeatedly carried him through warmer zones below 10,000 feet, allowing his body to recover some heat before being carried back to higher, colder altitudes. Statistical improbability. Some aspects of Rankin's survival were simply luck. The hailstones that struck him could have hit his head with enough force to cause fatal brain trauma despite his helmet. The lightning that struck near him could have struck him directly with lethal current. The parachute lines could have tangled in the turbulence, collapsing the canopy. Any of dozens of possible events would have killed him. The fact that none of them occurred was, in the final analysis, chance. The military's response to Rankin's survival and his detailed debriefing was to fundamentally reconsider high-altitude ejection procedures. Several changes were implemented. Ejection seat improvements. Newer ejection seats were designed with stabilization systems that would keep the seat in a controlled attitude during descent, reducing the tumbling that could injure pilots. Additionally, seats were equipped with emergency oxygen supplies that would function even if the aircraft's oxygen system failed. Pressure suit enhancements. The next generation of pressure suits included better thermal protection and improved waterproofing to handle the conditions Rankin had experienced inside the Thunderstorm. Parachute modifications. New parachute systems included pressure-sensitive deployment that would delay opening if the barometric altitude was decreasing slowly, indicating updrafts were present, preventing the parachute from deploying while the pilot was still being carried upward by storm currents. Training changes. Pilot training was modified to include instruction on the dangers of ejecting near or into thunderstorms, and protocols were established for attempting to glide clear of storms before ejecting when possible. Weather avoidance. Procedures for high-altitude flight were changed to require greater separation from thunderstorm tops, acknowledging that the previous assumption that storms did not extend above 40,000 feet was incorrect. Rankin's account was published in 1960 in a book titled The Man Who Rode the Thunder, which became required reading for military pilots. The book provided the first detailed description of what happens inside a severe thunderstorm from the perspective of someone who experienced it and survived. William Rankin continued to fly for the Marine Corps and retired as a colonel in 1964. He died in 2009 at age 89. In interviews throughout his life, he was asked repeatedly about his experience and what it felt like to survive the impossible. His response was consistent. "I don't have any special technique or trick that I can teach. I survived because my equipment worked when it should have failed, because my body endured what should have killed it, and because I was lucky in 1,000 small ways that accumulated to keep me alive." The lesson isn't about how to survive a thunderstorm. The lesson is, don't eject into a thunderstorm if you have any alternative. If you don't have an alternative, then do what I did. Hold on, try to stay conscious, and pray that the universe decides to let you live. When asked if he would have done anything differently, knowing what he knew afterward, his answer was immediate. "I would have tried harder to glide clear of the storm before ejecting. But given the situation I was in, engine exploded, controls gone, aircraft falling, I'm not sure I had any better option. Sometimes you're forced to choose between certain death and probable death. I chose probable death and got lucky." Today, At the National Museum of Naval Aviation at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida, there is an exhibit on high-altitude flight and ejection systems. Among the displays is William Rankin's damaged pressure suit, one of the few artifacts that survived his ordeal. The suit shows burns from lightning strikes, tears from hail impacts, and stress damage to the fabric from the repeated inflation and deflation cycles during his 40-minute descent. The placard reads, Lieutenant Colonel William Rankin, USMC, survived ejection at 47,000 feet into a severe thunderstorm on July 26, 1959. His 40-minute descent through the interior of the storm subjected him to conditions including updrafts exceeding 100 mph, hail, lightning, extreme cold, and hypoxia. His survival, attributed to his pressure suit and parachute functioning beyond design specifications combined with physiological resilience and chance, led to fundamental changes in high-altitude ejection procedures and equipment design. His detailed account remains the only first-hand description of the interior conditions of a severe thunderstorm from someone who survived the experience. At the Naval Test Pilot School, Rankin's case is studied as an example of several principles: equipment reliability, the importance of designing life support systems with large safety margins, because real-world emergency conditions may far exceed the design specifications. Situational awareness, the need to maintain awareness of weather conditions even at altitudes that are normally considered above the weather, because severe storms can extend much higher than typical. Risk assessment under pressure, the decision-making process when all available options are dangerous and the pilot must choose the least bad option without complete information. Physiological limits, understanding that human survival is possible in conditions that appear to be unsurvivable and that life support equipment can maintain life even when the user is unconscious or incapacitated. Documentation, the value of detailed after-action reporting, as Rankin's account provided information about thunderstorm interior conditions that had never been documented before and that influenced weather forecasting and aviation safety procedures. It is a reminder that survival sometimes has nothing to do with skill or preparation. Sometimes survival is about having equipment that works when it shouldn't, having a body that endures what should kill it, and having luck that defies probability. 40 minutes inside a thunderstorm, altitude varying from 47,000 feet to below 5,000 feet and back again, repeatedly. Hail impacts that fractured ribs, lightning strikes that caused burns and temporary blindness. Temperatures varying from -50°C to above zero, periods of unconsciousness from hypoxia and cold. One pilot who survived not through any technique or trick, but through the combination of equipment that functioned beyond its design limits, physiological resilience that exceeded normal human capacity, and pure chance that placed him in the small probability space where survival was possible. The impossible 40-minute fall that should have been a 4-minute descent. The thunderstorm that nearly killed him, but that also, paradoxically, saved him by slowing his descent and preventing a single catastrophic impact. Lieutenant Colonel William Rankin, who made a decision in 30 seconds, eject into a thunderstorm or ride a dying aircraft to certain death, and chose the option that gave him a chance, however small. One pressure suit that maintained pressure and oxygen through conditions it was never designed to handle. One parachute that remained intact despite forces that should have torn it apart. One human body that refused to die even when subjected to trauma, cold, hypoxia, and electrical shock that should have been fatal. The survival that proved sometimes living through the impossible requires nothing you can control, no technique, no trick, no special knowledge. Sometimes it requires only that your equipment works, your body endures, and the universe decides, for reasons unknown, that today is not your day to die. One man who fell through hell for 40 minutes and lived to tell the story that changed how we understand both thunderstorms and human survival limits. The only documented case of a person surviving extended exposure to the interior of a severe cumulonimbus thunderstorm. The proof that impossible is a probability, not a certainty, and that sometimes the universe allows the 1 in a million outcome to actually occur.